The relationship between men and mental health has often been called a silent crisis. On this podcast, we're breaking the silence. Welcome to Mental Health. It's time to talk. Here's your host, Allan Kehler.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to tune in. Oh, yes. On this show, we have someone who is so done with being silent when it comes to mental illness. We have someone who, in his own words, is one badass mental health activist. Welcome, Jae Blakley.
Good day.
Good day, Jae. Now, as many people know, your story is featured in the book Mental Health, It's Time to Talk. And I have to say that it is your story that has drawn some of the most attention. Jae, you have led one hell of an interesting life.
I have, so it would seem.
So it would seem. And I mean, even at an early age, Jae, you took that Mensa exam and you were deemed to have an incredibly high IQ, this child prodigy. Mm-hmm. And as we talked about in the whole write-up, depression obviously had other plans. How exactly did mental illness impact that overall intelligence?
Well, you know, like when I was 11 is when I was first tested and was admitted to Mensa. And I was basically told that anything I wanted to do with my life, I could do. And I decided I wanted to be an astronaut. And that was just a given. Yes, okay, well, he's going to be an astronaut. Go for it. But then I was having trouble with depression. I was bullied relentlessly in elementary school and had dealt with suicidal ideation, I mean, from even probably before the age of 11, if I think about it. And then, I mean, depression and meds for depression all have an impact on your IQ. I've also undergone 30 electroconvulsive therapy treatments, which have impacted my IQ as well, probably for the long term. So I'm still a member of Mensa, and they still put up with me there, but I'm not the prodigy I once was. But I am much healthier now, which I think sort of makes it worth it.
Yeah, and you put out an interesting post today on Facebook. Interestingly enough, it was 1 year ago today that you put out a post that kind of said, hey, listen, everyone, this is where I am. I'm back in the psychiatric facility at the Dubé Centre. Mm-hmm. But for me, when I read that, Jae, I thought, this is awesome to be able to sit with you today and know where you are. And when I think about where you were, it's quite remarkable because there were a lot of times in your life where you had a lot of shame when it came to your struggles with mental illness.
Oh, for sure. Like my first hospitalization back in 2006, I lied to everyone who asked where I was. The standard line was he's on vacation in the States and he's just out of communication for now. But I was in a psych ward for 6 months, and it was shameful. I definitely felt the shame of it and didn't want to tell anyone. And then when I went to the hospital again in 2014, I had a choice point. You know, I could go into lying again and not sort of own up to what was going on, or I could let people in and hopefully that would help me therapeutically and might be able to help some other people. So I started the blog, and it took off and went viral. And since then, everything's been on the table. Nothing's been hidden. And I'm happy to talk about my mental health struggles and successes with anyone who will listen.
And I think a lot of people will listen. I mean, the blog you're alluding to, you called it Jae Interrupted.
Yeah.
And when all of a sudden you're getting 13,000 views, to me that says something. It says that there's an intrigue. And some of that intrigue, Jae, I think has to do with the words like psychiatric facility, right? Or the center. And there's a lot of stigma even around that.
Sure
and
is.
I love that you were able to just let people into that world. So for people who are listening now, do you mind just sharing what it even is like to experience being in a facility like that?
You know, it's not a lot different than what you'd see on TV. An inpatient psychiatric facility is a special hospital for people who have mental illnesses. You're seen by psychiatrists every day and a team of psychiatric nurses. It's pretty bleak. They put in the floor to ceiling windows and the bright colors and nice paintings, but it is a psych ward and it is a sad place. It's not terribly conducive to healing, even, some of the better ones that I've been in. It's not something I would wish on anyone, but, if you need to be there, it's there for you. And hopefully the folks who are there are getting better.
Well, I know that one of the stories that people talk about with your experiences is at one point, Jay, you're like, I'm out of here. I'm on a smoke break. I prefer the other facility across the river. I'm just going to swim across the Saskatchewan River. How did that all happen?
Yeah, well, as a primer, like for anyone not familiar with Saskatoon, the South Saskatchewan River is raging during the summer. Like when it's in like high melt, that's a ferocious river to swim across, and I'm a weak swimmer. And like you'd said, I was at the Hantelman building on the east bank of the river, which was a psychiatric facility. And I really didn't want to be there anymore. And I preferred to be at the city psych facility, which was on the west bank of the river. And so while on a smoke break, I jumped the fence and swam across the river in my hospital pajamas.
Yeah. And to you, that just made sense at the time.
It made sense. And to the credit of the people taking care of me, when I arrived at the other psych facility, they decided to let me stay.
Well, that was mighty kind of them.
Yeah.
One of the diagnoses for you has to do with bipolar disorder. That's one of the labels that was also given to myself. And in my manic episodes, I mean, it's hard to explain the euphoria, but it's also potentially dangerous for people who aren't necessarily familiar with bipolar. What is your experience? What has it been like? How do you explain some of those highs and lows to people? Sure.
So at least as far as the disorder manifests with me, there are three distinct states. There's mania, hypomania, and depression. And very rarely do I not fall into one of those three states. I mean, you caught me on a really good night tonight. I'm just like, okay, not depressed, not manic, not hypomanic. Depression, a lot of people are familiar with. It's a low functioning mood. For me, it's characterized by sleeping 20 hours a day. I end up missing work. I don't eat. I usually lose a lot of weight, which is not always a bad thing. And then the hypomanic state is a more energized state, which I find myself in even today with all the meds that I'm on. I still become hypomanic from time to time. And so I'll do things like spending money when I shouldn't. I'll make grandiose claims on Facebook and Twitter, and the folks who know me well can tell, oh, Jay's hypomanic again. And then the manic state requires hospitalization, and that's a medical emergency where I'm in a state where I no longer require sleep at all. So I'll go for days and sometimes weeks without sleep, go for days or weeks without eating. So again, more weight loss. When I'm happy and healthy, I'm fat, and I'm like cresting about 160 pounds now, which is just about a record for me in the middle of COVID. So I'm doing okay. Well,
I'm glad to hear that you're doing okay. I mean, you're an open book when it comes to medication, and you shared that, you're on a few meds. In our previous conversation, you pointed out to me that lithium, which I did not know, that was one of the medications that I was put on. One of its side effects is what has given us this beautiful salt and pepper look. For those of you who are tuning in live streaming, you can see what I'm talking about. That's right, Jay. Give a little side profile.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Medication. There can definitely be a lot of positive things that come from it, but no doubt there can be a lot of significant negative side effects. What have some of those been for you, Jay?
Oh man, like the lithium that I was on for 7 years, of course, causes the lithium ion hair, the graying of the hair, damaging hair follicles, and it also poisons your internal organs. Like, it's not a really great drug to be on long term, but it is highly effective in a lot of cases for bipolar. And then the other two big meds, the big guns for bipolar disorder, are Epival and Latuda. And Latuda is a new one that's a new expensive drug that no drug plan will cover, which is why I'm not on it anymore. And then Epival is the drug that I'm on right now, which unfortunately has banned me from donating blood, which was something I had to think about pretty long and hard when I made the decision to go on Epival, because I am or was a regular blood donor with like 70 donations under my belt. And so I've had to now go for the entire 2020 and now into 2021 without donating any units of blood. So those are some of the drawbacks. I'm on like 12 different meds right now. 8 of them are for psych, and the rest of them are to treat the side effects of those psych medications, which are mostly like digestive and gastrointestinal problems from the psych meds. So you're never going to find a perfect medication or a perfect blend of medications, but I'm lucky that I've got a really competent therapist on board right now, which I hadn't had access to in the past. So between psychotherapy and meds and a great group of people that I'm surrounding myself with now, I've been able to stay healthy for the past few months.
That's awesome, Jay. Super, super happy to hear that. You mentioned the ECT, the electroconvulsive therapy.
Yeah.
I know that in your blog, when you started to do that blog, Jae Interrupted, from that inpatient facility, you really let people in. Like, you pulled the curtains back, and there was a lot of intrigue and mystery. What was your experience like with the ECT?
It's a bit of a difficult question to answer because I don't remember entirely well. That's one of the things with electroconvulsive therapy, is that it does cause retrograde and anti-retrograde amnesia. So it erases your memory for about a day before the treatment and will erase your memory for the rest of the day. So I've all 30 treatments that I've done throughout my life are compressed into a single, roughly minute-and-a-half long conglomerate memory. So the way the ECT starts in Saskatoon is that early in the morning, they wake you up before the other patients. They have a saline lock installed in your arm, usually the night before. You'll take the elevator ride down with 2 or 3 other patients to the ECT suite, which has got 6 beds in the basement of the facility. You put in a sterile hospital bed surrounded by curtains. You change into a hospital gown. They hook you up to an IV. And then the respiratory therapists and the anesthetist arrive and start drawing up the different meds like propofol and remifentanil that will put you under for the treatment. And then the psychiatrist arrives and they use the MECTA spectrum electroconvulsive therapy machine, which looks scary and sounds scary and is scary, but you never really become acquainted with it because you're unconscious for all the good bits. I would really love for someone to have a video camera in the ECT suite during one of my treatments so I can see exactly what it looks like. Because for me to say, you know, a seizure lasts, you know, a minute and 8 seconds or this, that, and the other thing, it's hard for me to say. The only insight I have is listening to and watching the people on the beds on either side of me go for their treatments. And if I'm lucky, I'll be the last person in line. So I'll get to listen to 3 or 4 or 5 people have treatments in the minutes leading up to mine. And from that, I can glean some knowledge as to what's going to happen to me when it's my turn.
The part, I guess, that stood out for me, Jay, was that because you were willing to let people into your world, it helped alleviate some of the fear for others who are about to enter into their first ECT treatment, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I know for you, it was a turning point where all of a sudden, I think in your own words, correct me if I'm wrong, but you no longer regretted your mental illness.
Yeah, and you know what? I'll tell you what happened and why I no longer regret my mental illness. And it was during the hospitalization in 2014 when I was writing the blog, and it hadn't quite taken off yet. You know, it was getting 1,000 or 2,000 hits per day, which was astonishing to me at the time. I mean, it was a far cry from the 13,000 that it was getting toward the end. But I received an email from a woman whose teenage daughter was struggling with self-harm. And she and her husband didn't know what to do about it. and they came across my blog. Someone had sent it to them, and they were able to use my blog as a starting point for sitting down as a family and having that important discussion with their daughter. And as a result of reading the blog and going through it, they were able to get her into treatment. And I received an email back from that same woman about a year later saying, you know, our daughter's been in treatment. She was hospitalized briefly, but things are doing well now. Thank you so much. And in that moment, I decided, you know what, I guess maybe this was how it was supposed to be. And, you know, going to the hospital sucks and depression sucks. It's no fun, but being able to help, you know, those few people has made it worth it for me. And so I've changed my occupation on Facebook from continuing care assistant, which I am and I do proudly, to mental health activist, which I absolutely adore.
And you do it well. There's a story and a picture, I guess, that stands out when I recall your story, and it hurts my heart, but I love how you were able to then turn it into, like what you're saying, this activism, because that one time, Jae, when you were at the inpatient facility, or at the psychiatric facility, and you're standing by the window looking down to the walking path below, there was an individual who kind of did that crazy symbol, right, circling around his ear to you.
Yeah.
Now, you could have let that anger just manifest. And no doubt you were pissed off for good reason.
Yeah, for sure.
You used that to do something completely different. What was that?
I went public with that in a Star Phoenix article. And then a couple of years later, my partner at the time and I created something called Signs of Healing. And so on the Meewasin Trail, which runs behind the Dubé Centre and is visible from all the common areas in Dubé, we erected basically a giant billboard with 4 signs on them that said, "You matter, you will get better, sick not weak," etc. And it stayed up for 6 months, and there were talks about duplicating the project at other inpatient facilities. The signs have since come down now, but it was a really incredible initiative that we almost got arrested for when we first tried to put them up, because my partner was dressed in climbing gear, and they thought that she was trying to scale the hospital walls at the time. And eventually the Saskatoon Health Region cooperated with us and hooked us up with the carpentry skills to put together this billboard with our messages on it. And the day they went up, we were featured on the front cover of the Star Phoenix, Saskatoon's daily newspaper. And that's about the proudest I think I've been.
Rightfully so. Because you just did not want another individual to experience what you had to endure.
Yeah, you know what? Like, I was lucky that that guy came when he did, and it was me that he did that to, because I'm a pretty resilient dude for the most part. And while I was furious with him, I was able to move past it. And I had worried for other people that maybe someone wouldn't be able to handle that attack. And I mean, shame on that guy. That's a crappy thing to do.
It's a crappy thing to do, but I think, in my opinion, a lot of people are ignorant, and I'm not sure that ignorance is necessarily a bad thing as much as it just means that they are not informed. And that's one of the things that I love about you. You just have become an open book. You allow yourself to be vulnerable. You allow yourself to feel, and I know that you have mentioned this many times, that you are fortunate and blessed to have a mother who allowed you to cry. A lot of men in particular really struggle to cry.
Yeah, for sure. No, like, crying is a huge thing for me, and it's something that I still do daily, you know, either at work or at home. And as you'd said, I was very lucky in that my mother's approach when I was a child and I would cry was to scoop me up and have me cry it out. There was never any mention of, "Oh, stop crying," or "boys don't cry," or anything like that. It was just keep crying until you're done. And that's an approach I use with my own son. And I think it's definitely the smart way to go.
And I'm curious, as a father, it changed things for you, didn't it? The way that you dealt with your mental illness.
it changed things completely because, and this is a sensitive piece of the topic, and I want to be careful in how I address this. I don't want to bring shame to anyone who's died by suicide, because that's a terrible thing to do. But in my opinion, at least in my case, when I had my son, it took suicide off the table for me. Because, 2 years before he was born, 2 or 3 years before he was born, I found myself standing at the top of a stepladder in my garage with a noose around my neck and barely survived a suicide attempt. And it occurred to me after he was born that I can't ever put this child, this person, in the position where he's got to cut his dad down. Because I have friends who have cut their fathers down, and that never goes away. So it's put me in the luxurious, enviable or unenviable position of just not being able to take the easy way out anymore. Whatever happens to me, including this last hospitalization a year ago, I've just got to deal with it. Like I can't just be killing myself because I feel I need that out. I've just got to deal with my stuff now. And that's scary, because having suicide on the back burner was always a comforting thing for me. Knowing that I had the ability to do it if I needed to, if things got really bad, I was confident in my ability to hang myself, and can't do that anymore.
And so then how do you deal with things to ensure that that never does happen? If that's off the table, how are you able to look at your emotions and continue to move forward?
Well, for me, it's about making sure that I've got a balanced plan in place, making sure that I'm staying up with my meds, that I'm talking to my family physician monthly, that I'm talking to my therapist weekly, that I'm taking time off from work if I need it, that I'm taking time off from life if I need it, that I'm being honest with my roommates about how I'm feeling on any given day, that they're being honest with me about how they're feeling, and we can talk about our feelings. And it's about making sure that I'm not hiding anything inside, which is something that I did, as a young man facing mental illness for the first time. I was always trying to hide the feelings just because I didn't know what they were. I was ashamed of them. And now it's like talking about it all the time has become so normalized for me that at work, I'm the guy everyone comes to when they've got a kid who's suicidal. And a lot of them do. And I'm the one who they come to when, their husband is depressed. And like a lot of them do. Mental illness affects a lot more people than we think about it. And when you do put yourself out there and become like the guy that everyone talks to about mental illness, such as I am, you realize that there's a lot of people hurting, and a lot of people would be hurting a lot less if we were talking a lot more.
Yeah. I love that. It simply comes down to the fact, and we talk about this a lot, that vulnerability breeds vulnerability. It has that ripple effect. Sure. I remember, Jay, pre-COVID, it was after the Mental Health It's Time to Talk book came out, and we had a couple copies on the Tim Hortons table, and there were some older women who walked by, and the one woman, she stopped and she says, "Oh, I need to get that book. I've heard about it." And I was like, this is Jay. Jay's featured in that book. And, I think for both of us, it has become something that we take pride in, and it's beautiful to just be done with that shame. But it is easy to say, and it is difficult to do, to move beyond the shame.
It is, but it's so much like what you talk about in your keynotes about emotional constipation could not possibly be more apt. Men suffer enormously from emotional constipation, and it's an intergenerational trauma that can be ended, and it's not all that hard to end as long as each one of us sort of takes ownership for finding one other dude and saying, "Man, let your stuff go."
Well, in your opinion, are you seeing a significant so-called shift? Like, do you feel as though men are starting to move the right way when it comes to just reaching out for help, putting a voice to pain?
I think women are still really beating the hell out of us when it comes to talking about their feelings. I think 9 times out of 10, when a man is referred to me for help, it's his wife or his daughter or his mother who says, you know, my husband, my son, my father needs someone to talk to. I thought maybe you could help him. So women are still doing a much, much better job than we are. But your book, your talks, my activism, like, it takes all these little efforts to get the ball rolling. And we're certainly doing better now than we were in 2006. But we're definitely not there yet. We've got so much more work to do.
Agreed. And it's the exact same thing for me, Jay, where it's not 99% of the time, it's women who approach me. But the thing is, I think that so many people get wrapped up in other people's journeys. Like they want everything to get better for the other person, but if the other person doesn't want that change cannot happen.
Yeah, for sure. And as like woke emotional dudes, we have to take some social responsibility for ensuring that other men are heard. And this is, it's something that really only affects men's mental health. Like there's no other issue where being a man puts you at a gross disadvantage, I think. Like, we certainly have male privilege in society. It's certainly easier in society to be a man for most things until it comes to talking about your feelings. And then it's just the expectation due to toxic masculinity that we keep quiet about these things, and it's literally killing us. And there's no other phenomenon like it that affects one gender in the way that mental health stigma affects men and kills us.
Yeah. Well said, literally. I mean, we are literally dying at a rate that is at least 3 times greater than women. And where we reside right now, I mean, in the prairie provinces, we have the highest suicide rates out of all the provinces.
Yeah.
There's a comment by Sylvia, you know, and kind of along the lines of what we're saying. She says, when I was diagnosed with chronic depression and anxiety many years ago, I was very open. And just like your experience, I had a number of people who come up and say that they needed to share their mental health concerns. And I think that is what we're saying, right? It's like that ripple effect. Let's go. Silence does not work.
Mm-hmm. No, it doesn't. And I think we need to look to women a lot more in adopting their strategies for talking about mental illness. Like, I had a coworker approach me a couple of weeks ago as I was walking in my car after a shift. And she said, you know, I just wanted to say thank you. I was like, for what? She said, well, my daughter was in Dubé at the same time as you, and you were really nice to her. And I didn't remember who her daughter was or remember being particularly nice to anyone, but we can look to women and try to adopt their strategies, in that women have unofficial support groups all the time, whether it's knitting, baking, painting, their paint nights they like to do, occasionally bringing men along with them. Those are smart activities that men should be engaging in. Like, there need to be more informal ways of us, aside from like going to an AA meeting or going to an Allan meeting or going to an NA meeting or going to, you know, like a sharing circle. We need to turn our bowling leagues and our poker nights into mental health talk nights and start picking a theme for the guys' night out. You know, like, we're going to talk about depression tonight, you know, when we get together and go bowling. We're going to talk about, you know, addiction when we go out for supper tonight, because women are already doing that and they're really good at it. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to adopt more women's behaviors, I think.
So what you're saying is you are going to start a paint night. Is that correct?
There's a dudes only paint night I'm starting right now, just for dudes. And we're going to paint some manly things with manly colors, and we're going to talk about mental health.
Oh my. Okay. Well, I'm down.
Yeah, I expect you to be there.
Okay. I will bring my finest paintbrush. Daniel's chiming in, you know, and the man has had one hell of a journey. He's sharing the pain I was dealing with saved my life. That's just it. Emotions beg to see the light of day. And Jay, I have some good news. We have Tyson Williams, who's also featured in the book. He says, I'm in.
Nice.
Jay, that means we have 3 people to do some painting. I'm already pondering my first drawing.
I think we democratically decide what we're all going to paint, and then we try to come up with our own version of it.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, I'll take the cue from you. I know that you're also currently, one of the things for wellness, it has to do with hobbies. Coming up with new hobbies. You're messing around with some, I don't even know what it was, Georgia hot pepper stuff that just seems absolutely toxic.
Yeah, some Carolina Reapers.
Oh, that's what it was.
Growing the hot peppers.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's the thing. It's like you have to find new things or even rediscover old passions, because I hear from a lot of people right now during COVID, they're struggling. They're struggling. And sometimes just comes back to, well, let me think about what I have a passion towards. And I think in our conversations, it has to do with just being open-minded and trying new things to ensure that you can find a path to wellness.
Yeah, for sure. And there is no one best path to wellness. Everyone's got their own. The Jae Blakley model is not going to work for every man, but it will work for a lot of us. And the Allan Kehler model is not going to work for every man, but it'll work for a lot of us. And so it's about, I think, seeking out other male role models too. Like if you're listening to this right now and you're struggling, you're looking at 2 dudes on the screen right now who are ready to talk to you tonight about this. And there are other people who are chiming in who are ready to talk to you about this. And there are helplines that are waiting for your call. Mobile Crisis is waiting to hear from you. So to an extent, you do have to take your life into your own hands, and no one can ultimately save your life but you. No one can make that decision to step down off the ladder or take that rope off around your neck but you. I
think about, I can't remember if I shared this recently on this podcast or not, but I think about a woman who had sponsored me to come to her community to talk about suicide, to talk about mental illness, and she had lost her son to suicide. And when I was talking about this ownership piece that you're alluding to and the word choice, because I said at the end of the day, we cannot take ownership of the choices that others make should they choose to die by suicide. And she was really hurt and upset over the word choice. But see, that's where it becomes tricky, doesn't it? Because in mental illness, our mind becomes rather blurry. What seems to be logical gets so distorted. And so sometimes, yeah, it sounds easy to make the call. It's, you know, it's one of those things, when we isolate and withdraw, it just gets darker and darker. So how then can people try to fight their way through it and ultimately find the help that they need?
I think, like for me, I suffered in silence for so long because I was waiting for a person to tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, are you okay? You know, like I think before the blog, I'd been ready to talk for a while, but I was just waiting for permission. And that's where you and I come in, where we have to start tapping a lot of other men on the shoulder and saying, hey, are you okay? Because, I mean, I was always a very expressive, emotional person, and it was so hard for me to talk about it to begin with. I remember hitting publish on the very first blog post where I just updated the people in my life about where I was and what was going on. And I deliberated on that for hours. I sat in my room with my thumb hovering over the button, waiting for either my phone battery to die or me to hit the damn button. And I finally hit it. And when I woke up in the morning, things were better. Not great, but better. And every time I hit publish on a new blog post, things got a little bit better. Not great, but better. And so I think we do have that responsibility to shoulder tap and ask other guys, you know, are you okay? Because for a lot of them, due to intergenerational trauma, the way they were raised, the way their families behaved, the way their dads behaved, they don't have that ability. And so there is less of a choice involved. So we, as activists, have got to point our activism in the direction of individual targets, I think. And if that means, you know, talking to your coworkers about it, even something as simple as saying, you know, I'm depressed today. That's powerful, you know, or I had some suicidal ideation last night. That's a powerful to say. If you've got a story that you can tell, you have some sort of, in my opinion, a social obligation to tell it. You know, if there's something compelling you can say to help other people, you really ought to do it. You know, like, I'm a staunch atheist. I'm not a big afterlife kind of believer. There's very, very little opportunity in your life to affect that sort of change, and you've got to take every opportunity you got.
Yeah, I love that about you. I find, Jay, that the hang up is this. You mentioned, and I totally agree, that it's an act of strength if somebody says, you know what, I'm depressed today. You know what, I'm having some suicidal ideations. The challenge is that when people hear that, they're not always sure how to react and how to respond. Yeah. And in your opinion, what are ways that can help move the right direction?
I think making yourself available to be that listening ear is pretty hugely important, because when you've got that one guy in the corner of your life who might put his hand up and say, hey, you know, me too, you got to go over there and look, I'm not a professional. I'm on a patient and family advisory committee. I'm a continuing care assistant. I have very limited training in mental health, aside from extensive lived experience. But it still falls to me to find that one guy in the corner of the room who's timidly putting up his hand, and me to say, okay, I'm listening. And you don't have to be a professional to listen to someone.
I think that's exactly it. Nobody has to be this formal counselor, but if we can just take the time to see people, to hear them, and then to be this liaison or to direct them accordingly, and figure out what role we want to play in that, then yeah, I totally agree. We're moving the right way.
Well, and two, it's about folks like you and me setting a good example. Like, some men are going to need to see a badass dude with a throat tattoo who's talking about mental health in order to make it acceptable for him to talk about mental health. And so any one of us who have the ability to talk, we've got to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Tyson says, well, he calls it the CCA Brotherhood.
Yep.
There you go. And, you know, Cindy's chiming in. Yes, that's so awesome. You don't have to be a professional to listen to someone, Cindy. Well, I agree, Jay. Agreed?
I agree completely.
Now, should people want to potentially reach out to you, what would the best way be? Or if they want to follow some of the awesome work that you're doing?
Hit me up on Twitter at ILike42.
Okay, that's the best way. Twitter.
That's the best way.
At ILike42.
Yep, number 42.
Okay, number 42. Well, listen, I so much appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening. I have mad respect for the path that you walk. You take good care, my friend.
Thank you very much.
All right, and everyone, thank you so much for taking the time to tune in. Take good care, keep talking, and yes, please be well.